Well, the Chinese authorities put out a communique saying that Bitcoin is no longer can be regarded as a currency in China. So instead, on the other hand, so financial institutions and banks are not allowed to do business with Bitcoin because it is not a currency. But on the other hand, Bitcoin trading has been legitimized. So people are allowed to trade, buy and sell Bitcoins in China.
So just because they talk about Bitcoin, that therefore legitimizes it, in your view?
No. The communique actually spelled out that Bitcoin buying and selling is okay for the Chinese people.
Okay.
So websites like BTC China, we're allowed to continue to service our customers to allow people to buy and sell Bitcoins in China.
Isn't it difficult, though, to make the case anymore that Bitcoin is any sort of a store of value when you see Bitcoin's value go down in a span of 4 days by 44%? How can you possibly call that any sort of a store of value?
Well, let's put it this way. Bitcoin has become a worldwide phenomenon in terms of an asset class. So it's not just a China thing. And furthermore, you don't have to be a currency in order for it to be a store of value. There are many other asset classes that are good stores of value that are not necessarily a currency. So I think Bitcoin has fallen into that. It is a virtual good, virtual commodity. That's what the legislator has defined it as.
Hey, Bobby, it's Brian Kelly. So I am an owner of Bitcoin as of the last couple of days, and I'm curious about the security of Bitcoin. So
yes.
How would you recommend somebody who goes out and buys Bitcoin, wants to hold it for the next year or two, how do they secure that?
Yes. So as Bitcoin is decentralized, people can hold the Bitcoins by themselves on their own computers, or they could defer it to websites to hold it for them. So on BTC China, people can buy it and leave their Bitcoin stored with us.
It's private money. They're going to have trouble gaining market share if its value is going to fluctuate so much. But it'll be interesting to watch.
But what is the position of the Fed from a policy perspective, if there is one, or what do you think the position of the U.S. government should be on Bitcoin or other virtual currencies?
For what they're doing, it's a free market, and I don't see why we have an interest in stopping it.
I want to get to what you always do with Fed guys, and you love their forecast for GDP.
Well, yeah, sure,
right.
Because it tells you what they think about policy.
I want to just frame it in a different way. Okay, so we got this deal. We got 2 years of budget, so that's out of the way. But there are those that say, healthcare reform was a big question mark, tax reform is a big question mark. We've had all this uncertainty that supposedly explains to some extent why this recovery has been more tepid than past recoveries. On the other side, there are people that say it was because of the depth of the problems that we had, that demand has just not been there. What are we going to be able to do? What can this economy do, knowing that Obamacare is still around, regulations are not going anywhere anytime fast? We probably won't do tax reform, but what are we capable of doing just with the bare minimum with a budget deal? Can we do 3? Is it that good?
That's a good question. So I do think that uncertainty about marginal tax rates and government spending programs to vendors, who supply to the government, has been a dampening effect on growth in the last couple of years, and I do think that resolving some of that uncertainty will have a positive effect. But the effect might be minor. When I think about what's holding back growth right now, and we were talking before, I'm looking for 2.25 next year.
That's
sort of on the low side. Yeah, I mean, if you look back for 4 years, we've had 2.25, and it looks like we're going to get more. Yeah, I think you got to start with households. 2/3 of the economy, they've been through the worst recession since the 80s. Before that, they'd seen, steady growth, 2 really mild recessions, not widespread job loss in those 2 minor recessions, and growth in their stock portfolios, growth in home equity and the like. Now they've learned that the world's a riskier place than they thought, and that's going to have a lasting effect on their willingness to spend. Plus, you add on top of that the increase from the 80s through the 2000s in the availability of credit, that maybe overshot a little, now has come back, and now I think we're at an equilibrium. I don't think you're going to have
2015, 2016, 2000. You Fed guys can go out years at a time. I've seen you make the your Fed fund thing.
No, but that's really what you're asking is what is the long run potential growth of the economy? It sounds to me, Jeff, you're saying you've brought it down.
Yeah,
you don't think 3 is a natural state. You think 2 and 2.25 is a natural state.
Well, on top of that, the decline in the labor force participation, which I think
bad.
You think that's
now? I think it's being driven by demographic factors.
I think gold is really the comp here right now. There's about 1.3 trillion that's held in gold right now in terms of ETFs and investments and whatnot. If 10% of that were to say go to Bitcoin as a store of value, you'd have a Bitcoin price that's in excess of $6,000. And then you add to it all the transactions that people can do with it. There's new startups like Coinbase that are allowing people to transfer Bitcoin with the ease that a Western Union or a PayPal transfer of cash could occur. So I think that it'll be used for both of these things. But store of value, I think, is the biggest market size right now.
Is it possible, RJ, that maybe PayPal could even turn Bitcoin into a new source of revenue, maybe become something like a legitimate currency exchange for it?
Yeah, I think that's a huge opportunity for PayPal. Right now, a lot of the Bitcoin agencies that are out there are having trouble getting regulatory approval. And I think PayPal, given that it has a lot of different currencies that it already accepts across the world, it certainly could turn into a revenue source, becoming effectively a Bitcoin exchange of sorts. Really haven't heard a commitment out of PayPal at this point whether or not they plan to accept Bitcoin. But if we do see it becoming more and more accepted, I would see no reason why it wouldn't be part of the PayPal wallet at some point. It really could become an opportunity.
It's a huge market. I mean, I think PayPal did about $44 billion in gross transfers last quarter. Right now in Bitcoin, you've got about $12 billion going to at least $21 billion, assuming that you keep the price the same as the actual number of coins comes out of the ether. So it's a massive opportunity, and it flows so easily cross-border. As you look at more and more international trade, I think that Bitcoin is going to be huge.
We are really interested in this, Pietro, because there's, as of right now, just a random smattering of retailers and vendors that are accepting Bitcoin. What made you decide to get on board?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Pleasure being here. We just had the opportunity to receive a call from a gentleman from all the way from Florida, and we did our due diligence. Obviously, we tried to accommodate our customers, our requests. This was a bit odd, so we looked into it. I've been reading reading the paper, the European papers, even about this currency or virtual currency. So we did our due diligence, and we found out that actually we would have been receiving US dollar. And that for us was very good.
Due diligence on the currency itself, due diligence on the person using it, how did that process work?
Well, due diligence on the currency, what does it mean to us, somebody buying with a virtual currency? So we find out that by using a little program that Bitcoin uses, which is actually BitPay, we would have received US dollars. So for us, that was very good. It's like if you come into the dealership and you want to buy a Lamborghini using gold bars, we will not accept it. We would accept US dollars. So you go out, you exchange it, you come back to us. So that's how it worked.
So technically, you never held the Bitcoins yourself. Just the person completed the transaction. You ended up with dollars. If this had involved you holding Bitcoin for any amount of time, would you have done this deal?
I don't think so. I don't know. We accept only US dollars. I don't accept euros or any other foreign currency. I would have not ventured out with Bitcoins.
And Pietro, at what stage did it become clear to you or your employee that would be the currency of choice? I mean, is he there on the lot saying, and by the way, I'd kind of like to use Bitcoin to pay for this?
Well, actually it was. I mean, it was on a transaction on the phone, constantly on the phone. It was not present. He bought the car sight unseen. So within the description of the car, he also mentioned, can I pay in Bitcoins? We said, let us come back to you, and that was it. Very simple.
What made you decide to take Bitcoin?
Well, the idea of a non-centralized currency that was inflation-proof was something we really liked. So it was pretty interesting to us.
And Sam, I'm wondering, how much honey do you sell, and have you done many Bitcoin transactions so far?
We've done a lot of Bitcoin transactions, and we we sell out of honey every year.
It's Karen. Let me ask you guys something. Once you get the Bitcoin payment, do you immediately sell it for cash, or do you want to hang on to your Bitcoin?
We've held on to our Bitcoins. We could transfer it to cash if we wanted, but we've thought it would be better to hold on to the Bitcoins.
Does it worry you, Nathan, that, there are some periods, recent periods, where we saw the value of Bitcoin plummet dramatically? Or are you thinking that, eventually maybe by the time you go to college, these things are going to be worth something, you're going to cash in to pay your tuition?
Well, at first we were pretty worried about when the drops and rises, but now we've got used to it, and I think it's going to keep going up.
Have you guys made more money on the appreciation of the Bitcoin than the underlying product? I bet you have.
Yeah, we have.
That's very cool.
That could be a lot of honey.
I mean,
right,
13 and 15?
That's amazing.
That's unbelievable. What is that, like 8th grade?
I would go straight to a Harvard MBA.
No, you can probably pull some strings.
No, it's straight to dropping out of Harvard. That's what you want to do.
Well, here's one, guys, some simple math. What was, when you actually did the some sort of calculation, what was the most expensive container of honey that you sold after the appreciation from the Bitcoin? Did you figure it out? You sold it for a certain price in dollars, right? And then you got Bitcoin for it.
They don't take the SATs for a couple of years. I mean, leave them alone. I mean, look at these two. Go ahead. Give them an answer.
Our first order was one little box of caramels. We sold that for 1.8 Bitcoin. And that's now a lot more.
A whole lot more.
Well done.
And do you think you're selling more honey because you accept Bitcoin? Do you think there are people who may not even know about your business except for the fact that you take Bitcoin?
Maybe.
Well, now a whole lot more people know about your business, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Good luck to you.
Could you send Guy Adami some honey lip balm, please?
Thanks for being here.
Sam and Nathan Hunsinger.
The digital currency taking a hit after another apparent clampdown by Chinese authorities. Over a week ago, the People's Bank of China banning financial institutions from handling Bitcoin transactions, saying the digital currency posed a risk to the financial system. Now, reportedly, third-party payment processors in the country say they've been told not to work with Bitcoin exchanges. As a result, BTC, the largest Bitcoin exchange in China, says it can no longer accept yuan deposits, though it says it's still transacting Bitcoin-based deposits exchanges and withdrawals. Now, the news shaking up the Bitcoin community as the Chinese exchange is the busiest in terms of volume, followed by exchanges in Japan and Europe. Yuan volume of Bitcoin spiking today as the value of the digital currency took another leg down, falling below $500 overnight. It's rebounded to roughly $600, meaning it's just about 50% below its all-time high of $1,220. The brainchild of an anonymous, reportedly Japanese programmer, Bitcoins are backed by, or not backed by, a central bank and are created by computers solving complex math problems. With just over 12 million in circulation now, the supply will hit its limit of 21 million by 2040. It's, of course, drawn a high-profile following here in the U.S. and from some big-name tech investors. While U.S. officials have acknowledged it could show promise as a transmitter of funds, still they, like officials from other Bitcoin-friendly countries like Norway, won't acknowledge it as a currency, and certainly the volatility that we're seeing today provides critics a reason to argue against it from ever becoming any kind of replacement for government-backed currencies like the U.S. dollar.
Bobby, are you being run out of town by authorities?
Well, so today we actually received notice from our third-party payment processor, and they essentially have cut us off from allowing customer deposits into BTC China's Bitcoin exchange.
You had no official announcement that came from the PBOC. You had to receive this from those third-party dealers. So what is this saying? Does it speak volumes that the PBOC won't even engage with you?
Yeah, so there are rumors that the PBOC held a meeting on Monday with the top third-party payment companies in China. And as you may know, Bitcoin exchanges in China require the use of a third-party payment company in order for us to take customer deposits and also for us to pay customer withdrawals back out. So what we don't directly hear from the People's Bank of China, the central bank, but rather we got notice from the third-party payment providers that they will stop servicing us for customer deposits. And as people know, we're still holding a lot of customer deposits at our Bitcoin exchange, and customers don't have to worry. The deposits are still here. The withdrawals are still being allowed, so there's no need to panic on that.
Bobby, interesting that you're using the word panic and telling investors there's no need to panic. Could this be the catalyst that stops the Bitcoin rally?
Well, it certainly has already stopped the rally. If you've noticed, the price has come down quite a bit. From a few days ago, it was trading a little over 5,000 RMB, and now it's probably half of that right now. The latest price I saw was around 2,800 RMB, so it's come down quite a lot, 40 to 50% in the last few days.
Bobby, what do you think this represents? Karen, I think, opened up the conversation with you by saying, you know, is this the sign that you're actually being run out of town? The Chinese authorities have been increasingly concerned, I think, that Bitcoin is being used or perceived as a way that Chinese can move their wealth out of the country. Is this ultimately what's happening, that the Chinese government is just finding ways now of preventing that taking place through the Bitcoin mechanism?
So what you said about a worry of Bitcoin being used to move wealth out of the country, that is actually not an official stance. That is not. I have not heard anyone make that as an official comment. So it's probably just speculation on your part or anyone else out there in the media. What it does say is that, you know, every company that operates in a national jurisdiction, whether in China or elsewhere, we have to follow the rules and regulations of the country and which is set by the government. So in our case, what the government says we're allowed to do, we're not allowed to do, it does affect the popularity. It does affect the uptake of Bitcoin in China. Now, thankfully, on December 5th, the ruling is that on December 5th, the central bank issued a statement saying that Bitcoin exchanges are legal. Essentially gave the right, it acknowledged the basic right of people in China to buy and sell Bitcoins from Bitcoin exchanges such as BTC China. So our business model is still valid. However, we're under some pressure in terms of being able to work with a third-party payment company. So we're looking for alternatives.
Well, Bitcoin has certainly made its stamp on China. You've seen a bit of a Bitcoin frenzy over there. But yeah, this is interesting. The latest coming out from the People's Bank of China, the central bank in China, issuing a statement, a pretty strong one, saying, here it is, Bitcoins are virtual goods that have no legal status or monetary equivalent and should not be used as currency. Essentially, Bitcoin is more or less forbidden in the Chinese financial system. But you might remember last month, the PBOC Vice Governor Yi Gang saying that Bitcoin could be freely traded, but the government would not accept them as currencies. Now, this is, as Julia is going to come in and tell us, potentially very important for Bitcoin's future because, as I said, there's major Bitcoin fever going on in China. Volumes now traded in China are higher than they were anywhere else in the world, and returns on Bitcoin this year have surpassed real estate even, oil, and that's something because the Chinese don't have a whole lot of investment options, and Bitcoin is proving to be a very popular one.
Bitcoin fever, yet Bitcoin bubble is also a term that many have been using given the huge gains in the share price. Now, in terms of those gains in the share price, well, it's come off a bit overnight on the back of those announcements from China. We've got the yuan Bitcoin exchange rate down by almost 20% before rebounding slightly. Julia's been tracking the volatile price swings for us, and Julia, you got to say, you know, this argument that potentially we might be seeing a bubble in the Bitcoin marketplace, if you can call it that, when you look at these charts, it is a possibility.
I think what we're seeing with the Bitcoin price, RL, is that it's just extremely volatile. If we look at the Mt. Gox exchange, it was trading at about over $1,200 before this announcement. In the 2 hours following, it fell to about $870, and it's now back above the $1,000 mark. And I think what we're seeing is the market trying to digest a few different pieces of information. I mean, this China news, we did think that something of this nature was coming. And also, we did actually have overnight the announcement that the Bank of America has actually initiated coverage on this RL, and it's seeing a price target of about a fair value of about $1,300. RL?
Which would suggest then, wouldn't it, Julia, that in fact we're not in bubble territory as yet?
Yes, that certainly is what is being suggested, and Bank of America does see that the price will head higher in the near term.
The firm is invested in a number of different Bitcoin companies, and probably the most notable one is BTC China, which is now the largest Bitcoin exchange in the world.
Do you see that the regulations coming out of China now, and the fact that a lot of e-commerce players like Baidu are no longer accepting Bitcoin, that puts a ceiling on Bitcoin and it limits its use? I mean, I would think that as an investor in Bitcoin, your ultimate goal is you want it to be used widely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, regulation is inevitable in something like this. It's being used for payments, or it can be used for payments, and it's very important that there's appropriate regulations to make sure that issues like money laundering and drug financings and so forth do not take place with Bitcoin in the same way that we don't want them to take place with cash or credit cards or anything else. So I think the regulation is to be expected, and it's really, I think, healthy to have clarity about rules so that the companies in the ecosystem can now continue to grow knowing what the ground rules are.
A lot of people will view Bitcoin out there, and they're just sort of average people, and they see the volatility in Bitcoin, and they think that's crazy. That cannot be an investment. That cannot be called any sort of alternative currency, and it certainly can't be called a store of value if in a span of, there was a span of 4 days last week where Bitcoin lost 44% of its value. What do we need to see in order for Bitcoin to become more widely accepted and for your investments to actually then pay off? Do we need that volatility to come down?
The volatility is definitely an important factor, but I don't think it's actually necessary for the volatility to be dampened for Bitcoin to be used widely as a payment mechanism. What's important is that there's a deep and liquid market between Bitcoin and fiat currencies like the US dollar. So that, for instance, even if Bitcoin is volatile, if as a merchant I can accept payment in Bitcoin and a millisecond later I can trade out of that Bitcoin and into dollars, then I don't care about the volatility. I'm only holding that Bitcoin for a millisecond. But what is required for that to happen is that deep and liquid market. And we're seeing that through these exchanges.
Doesn't the need to change the Bitcoin into dollars defeat the purpose of having an alternative payment system?
Well, the key is payments, because payments cost money. If you use your credit card at Starbucks, it's 3%.
Right.
If you're sending money internationally, it could be 5, 10, 15%. But Bitcoin allows that transaction to happen without any charge. And so that's actually an advantage that can then drive costs down through the system for merchants and eventually for consumers as well.
Bitcoin is an industry, let's call it currency, which is going to be watched more and more and increasingly by countries around the world. I think China is an area where it was growing pretty dramatically, so the government decided to step in and keep a closer eye on it for now. But I bet we're going to see more to come.
As your coverage has initiated, you said, look, huge disruption, a potential disruption, I should say, but the success, in your words, is binary in nature. So it's sort of all or nothing, isn't it?
To some extent, I think that's right. I mean, you basically have a number of different issues that we have to watch out for, whether it's friction in the environment to get Bitcoin in and out of the system. More importantly, though, I mean, it's really just watching how, the volatility in the currency works. That could be an inhibiting force for consumers. So if we can get past all that, the next step is regulation, right? And so regulation may level the playing field to some extent. But overall, I think it is somewhat binary.
Darren, I'm fascinated at where you're coming from at this from. You're the IT consulting and computer science guy at Barclays. You published a note after you'd had a lunch with the founder of Second Market. I mean, I think you're approaching this very much from inside the IT community rather than, banking or asset management or any other approach. It's almost like the view from within Silicon Valley, if you like. Is that correct?
I think that's probably fair. I mean, look, there's a definite force in Silicon Valley hoping for this to be successful. The reality is we also cover payment stocks. We cover Visa. We cover MasterCard. I cover Western Union and Zoom. And so the point is, really, we're looking at this from a perspective of, on one hand, this is a great innovation and a great way to make payments move even faster. On the other hand, this is something we have to watch closely for as potential disruption to a lot of the incumbents in the industry that are doing things their way. Again, whether that's Visa or MasterCard or others. this could have very important implications for those stocks over time.
But Darren, you say that regulation will level the playing field. I think the jury is out at this point in terms of how you refer to Bitcoin. You called it a currency, but it's something you mine, and others have called it a commodity, possibly regulated by the CFTC. I mean, how do you define it first? And second, how do you begin to regulate it?
You know, a very good question. Again, I mean, from our perspective, it is a currency. It's something that's meant to be used on e-commerce seamlessly, without transaction fees, without delay in settlement time. Really, that's the biggest differentiator between that and U.S. dollars or other currencies going over systems, is that with Bitcoin or other types of digital currencies, you don't need to wait T+1 or 3 days for your cash to get across borders. You don't need to pay certain transaction fees, whether it's money transfer fees or interchange fees that the networks make. That's the benefit here, but it is a currency movement.
Yeah. Finally, Darren, what do you tell merchants who say they're starting to accept this?
I'd say just make sure you understand the volatility in it, really, because, you know, while at some point I think it could very well get to be and become a larger part of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, you could buy something or sell something for $1,000 that might be worth $500 just because of the currency tomorrow.
Betting on Bitcoins has paid off for Li Lin. Li opened an exchange for the virtual currency in Beijing just 6 months ago. He's minted souvenir Bitcoins out of silver for his clients, believing Bitcoins are just as valuable, if not more so, than precious metals. Bitcoin is a strong competitor to gold, he says. It's virtual gold. Chinese investors are driving the prices of Bitcoin worldwide. The currency is a popular way to invest here, as people have few investment options and see Bitcoin as a coveted commodity. In Beijing's version of Silicon Valley, traders buy and sell Bitcoins at this coffee shop for startups.
This is one of the most popular places for Bitcoin traders in China to get together. They hold seminars here and swap information about the virtual currency.
Chandler Guo says he has 1,000 Bitcoins. Despite recent volatility, the 30-year-old prefers the currency because it helps him transfer money worldwide fast, a luxury Chinese have never had before due to the country's currency controls. Bitcoin is actually a financial network, he says. If you're in the U.S. and I'm in China, if I ask you to send me 2 Bitcoins, you can transfer them right away. The authorities are wary of anything that could disrupt China's tightly controlled financial system and are unnerving Bitcoin believers by cracking down on its trade here, most recently stopping certain exchanges from taking more yuan deposits, a key to driving prices higher. Li isn't worried. He says his firm's trading volume is the equivalent of $50 million a day. Bitcoin is more trustworthy because its credit is based in science, he says, not in an individual or a state. Perhaps not exactly what the government would like to hear. Eunice Yoon, CNBC, Beijing.
You know, you call it a first assessment, but if you read through to the end here, it sounds like you're kind of saying, yes, Bitcoin right now could be in a bubble.
Yeah, I think so. That's exactly it. I think there are 2 questions. One is Bitcoin going to be here to stay as a currency? I think the answer is probably yes, because I think as a medium exchange, that definitely has got a lot of advantages. However, the second question is, does it have that much more upside in terms of the price appreciation? Having gone up so much for this year so far, our analysis will suggest that the upside is going to be much more limited from that point of view.
And David, how can you look at the price relative to fundamentals for a Bitcoin when, even though there's people out there saying the supply is ultimately limited, Bitcoin can be modified. The rules can be modified by the Bitcoin community. So how do you figure out what the supply is and extrapolate from that what the price should be?
That's it. That's exactly it. That was the challenge for this whole analysis, because in many ways Bitcoin is like a multi-head animal. And it's got many different purposes. We decided to basically break it down into 3 pockets and trying to basically value them independently of each other. So the first part of Bitcoin, I think, is about mean of exchange, especially for e-commerce. So we assume that what if Bitcoin were to become, let's just say, 10% of all e-commerce B2C transactions will all be denominated Bitcoins, how much would that be worth? We came to a conclusion about $5 billion in terms of market cap. The second question is, what if Bitcoin were to become one of the top 3 providers of money transfer, which is basically a major, advantage that Bitcoin offers? We came to a conclusion that will probably add another $5 billion to Bitcoin's market cap. And finally, what about Bitcoin as a store of value? We decided that, probably the closest thing Bitcoin can become is probably something like silver. If it becomes like silver, that will probably give you another $5 billion market cap. And that gives you total $15 billion.
Yeah, yes. So it's almost more of a top-down
strategy looking at the value of other kinds of services or goods that perform similar roles and using that to imply a value as opposed to just a supply and demand argument.
Exactly. I mean, because at the end of the day, you know, I think we've never seen anything like this before. So you've got to basically have to look at this thing out of the box to be able to reach some kind of fair value notion. I think clearly the market is very much in need for a fair value assessment because I think, you know, otherwise you don't know how far this thing can go. So I think from that point of view, this is why I think this piece has resonated with a lot of investors.
And what about this move in China, for example, to ban Bitcoin, given some of the concerns about fraudulent use and also some of the worries people have longer term about this drawing more hackers who are able to just exploit the system? I mean, I know you're not recommending whether or not Bitcoin should be adopted, but from an investment point of view, are those major risk factors?
There's no question. I think there's no question that I think Bitcoin has some inherent risk. But I think we also have to recognize the fact that Bitcoin does have a role to play in countries where citizens face either high taxes, capital controls, or for that matter, even high confiscation risk.
Well, the bank and other Chinese financial authorities saying their notice is also being taken to protect the value of the yuan and to reduce any threat Bitcoin may pose to financial stability. And while the authorities are restricting banks' use of Bitcoins, a translated version of their statement says ordinary people can use it at their own risk. Chinese demand and acceptance by large Chinese firms like Baidu.com, along with statements from public officials here in the U.S. about Bitcoin's potential, are behind the huge increase in Bitcoin's price over the last 2 months. Now, today's news out of China causing Bitcoin to initially drop by about $400 on Mt. Gox, one of the many exchanges where it trades, though it has rebounded to over $1,000. Jerry Brito of George Mason University downplays the long-term impact the news from China will have on Bitcoin, saying it's unlikely to hurt demand in that country. Though Jeremy Allaire of Circle Internet Financial, a digital currency company, feels it will have a chilling effect on the nascent Bitcoin-linked economy in China, therefore providing an opening for U.S.-based Bitcoin firms to step in and profit from the virtual currency's growing popularity. Bitcoins are produced by miners solving complex math problems. Their supply is limited. Prices set by supply and demand on exchanges, and they're not backed by a central bank. They've attracted a dedicated following of libertarian and tech-centric investors. But questions about its value continue to dog it. Bank of America, in a note today, currency strategist David Wu, seeing it as a source of payment in the future. He put a $1,300 price target on it, but still questions its ability to replace fiat currencies.
This really coming from the European banking authorities saying, you know, don't come crying to us if something goes wrong. And this is what we're hearing a lot from governments around the world, from China, from Korea, from Thailand, all really putting out the alert that this currency is not for the faint-hearted. One of the only empirical studies that we've seen actually done into the Bitcoin exchanges that we see cropping up all of the time actually took 40 Bitcoin exchanges over the space of 3 years and found out that 18% of those, 18 of those exchanges had actually failed without any notice to those who had actually invested in the exchanges. So that's a failure rate of about 45%. The average life cycle of these exchanges was about 381 days, so just slightly over a year. So this is very risky business. It's really encouraging people, this latest email and dissemination from the European Banking Authority, to really look very carefully at the investment and be careful of their passwords. Make sure that they're not putting all of their money or all of their money that they can't lose into Bitcoin, because it's a very risky place for your money to be at the moment without any regulations. So, Chloe, this is something we're going to keep talking about.
I'm sure.
Definitely over the
And
over
did
the
you
next
know
couple
that
of
the
months.
Bitcoin Fund, which is traded exclusively on the Xchain Fund platform, launched in late 2012, that is actually the best performing hedge fund platform. So it just goes to show how much bubble
There's a lot
has
of
been
money
in
in
there.
it.
Best performing hedge fund year to date with a return of 4,847%.
A lot of money in Bitcoin.
Exactly.
A lot of risk.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for that. You have a fantastic Friday.
Bitcoin was one of those stories in 2013 that kind of nobody saw coming. At this time last year, everyone was talking about what's the Fed going to do, and is the market going to go up or down, and what's happening in Europe. But Bitcoin was just such a unique story that it was just, you know, this cryptocurrency that a lot of people really didn't understand. The price started to go crazy. So I think kind of going into 2014 now, we start to ask ourselves questions. what really is it? And I just don't think that there's a lot of understanding out there. So there's going to be a lot of myth busting. One of the things that I thought was really important in a piece that came out overnight from Nick Colas at Convergix was this whole concept of, is it a currency? Now, I think that its proponents would say it is a currency. Its opponents would say that it's just this sort of fad, like a Beanie Baby kind of thing. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. Dick Beauvais from Rafferty had put out a note a couple weeks ago saying it's basically like a credit card. So I think, you know, that could be the analogy there. But I do think that if the price of Bitcoin can start to stabilize this year, it becomes a much more serious player in the market, and it's going to be something that the banking industry in particular is going to have to take a very close look at.
We do it every Friday, and this is interesting, folks. Overnight, Beyonce dropped a surprise album on everybody. You got Mega Millions Lotto Mania and Bitcoins for a Mansion. Let us bring in pop culture commentator Nancy Giles. Nancy, great to see you again.
Thank you.
Welcome
it's great
back.
to be
Good
here.
to see you.
Thank
All
you.
right, so all of a sudden on iTunes this morning, hey, here's a new Beyonce album. What do you think?
I tell you, she is a master. They both are masters at commerce and at marketing because everybody's talking about it. And what really interested me is I think there's 14 songs and 17 videos. So how does that work out? Are there some videos that are completely outside of what the songs are or multiple? But in any case,
So you want to go to iTunes? See, this is the point.
Even just
you
that.
now want
What's
to go to
she
iTunes
doing?
and check it out.
Of course. And this isn't even the album. This is just the stuff that's available on iTunes. The album comes out later this month, so it's like double dipping.
And she feels like she can speak directly to her fans by doing this, sort of cutting out the middleman. But it
don't
feels
blame her.
almost, I mean, like we said, it's like the Netflix of the music.
I know,
business,
you're
isn't it?
absolutely right.
Yeah.
It is like that, directly to the people that want it, you know. And I think that it's kind of cool that artists now get to control their content and profit from it.
We've also got, well, we are Friday the 13th, but lottery players are feeling lucky today. But I believe the chances of hitting the jackpot are getting smaller and smaller
They're
and smaller.
terrible. You can be hit by lightning easier than
I
when
heard it was actually twice.
No, you haven't.
Yes, the odds of winning tonight are less than being, or the odds are greater. It's harder to win than being hit by lightning twice.
You're absolutely right. I didn't do the math.
Nancy, 400 million plus bucks. It'll be well above that tonight by the time of the draw. I think the draw is tonight or tomorrow night. Either way, are you buying a ticket?
You know, I might, but it depresses me, the whole thing about the lottery. A lot of people, lower income people, spend more money on lottery tickets than middle income.
80% of the lottery is funded by the 24% of the population.
And I've seen them. I've seen people who don't have that much spare cash, who are buying tickets, cashing them in, and then buying them again. I want to know where the lottery money goes. I remember years ago they used to say in New York City that it would go to improve schools and whatnot.
That's the idea.
But we're still struggling with the schools. The schools are still stinky. I think there could be some graft or something there. Just lay it out right now.
I'm sure the states get their cut, and
Where
it is a
does
fat
it go?
cut.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah, okay, we've also got the owners of a Las Vegas mansion. It's up for sale. It's multiple millions of dollars, and they're willing to accept Bitcoins. This must be a first.
I even told the producer, Bitcoins, question mark. I kind of don't get it. It's like a new kind of barter system. Is that what it is? It less?
It's a virtual currency or cryptocurrency, I think.
You have a giant algorithm stream, and then basically you mine that. Somebody can pay you in a Bitcoin. They're unique.
Is that what they look like streams?
No, it's like literally numbers and letters in a giant. I'm not sure how many there are in there, but it's long. And then you can sort of mine it. You can pay people with it. It's been very volatile. Some people believe it's going to go to the millions of dollars per Bitcoin because there's only going to be 21 million ever produced. That's what they said, but nobody even knows who produced them.
Well, see, I need to know if you can hold them in your hand and look at them and whose face is on them. And if there's nothing like that, I
vote for your face to be put on it. But Nancy Giles, Bitcoin, thank you so much for joining us.
The digital currency making gains as it gets a vote of confidence from a big Silicon Valley investor despite continued skepticism from regulators and the financial establishment. The vote of confidence coming from Silicon Valley guru Mark Andreessen. His firm, Andreessen Horowitz, investing $25 million in Coinbase, reportedly the largest ever in a Bitcoin-related company. Coinbase operates the digital wallets needed to store Bitcoins in an exchange for buyers and sellers. Less enthusiasm from the European Banking Authority, which issued a warning about the risks of loss and lack of regulation among virtual currencies like Bitcoin. And while Norway is a Bitcoin-friendly country, it said it can't be defined defined as real money, so it plans to tax bitcoins as an asset. Lastly, mutual fund giant Fidelity quickly shuttered a short-lived program allowing qualified investors to put some of their self-directed IRAs in the Bitcoin investment trust. Still, if you have them, one homeowner in Las Vegas says he'll accept bitcoins for the 25,000 square foot estate in Las Vegas that he's trying to sell for just under $8 million.
I may be completely wrong on this, but I think that Bitcoin is one of the greatest fads in the history of fads. This is a greater fad than Paris Hilton. I don't really understand Bitcoin. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me as a investment, except that maybe there's sort of the rarity, sort of collectible factor in that when there's sort of supply-demand issue, I can understand the people who want this stuff. I'm not sure when it fades away. I think it fades away the second governments really start to get involved. The big story of all of 2014 is going to be Bill de Blasio and the sort of class warfare that is going to erupt, and perhaps the reemergence of Occupy Wall Street, actually. The business community is going to be legitimately freaked out by him and the things he will say. What he actually does in practice and what he says may be two different things, but he's going to play it to the hilt. I would like to predict Miley Cyrus could do porn in 2014. That's not a bad prediction. She got pretty close already.
Well, trading in bitcoins has been wildly popular here, but the government just this week decided to stop all third-party payment systems dealing in the virtual currency.
Betting on bitcoins has paid off for Li Lin. Li opened an exchange for the virtual currency in Beijing just 6 months ago. He's minted souvenir bitcoins out of silver for his clients, believing bitcoins are just as valuable, if not more so, than precious metals. Bitcoin is a strong competitor to gold, he says. It's virtual gold. Chinese investors are driving the prices of Bitcoin worldwide. The currency is a popular way to invest here, as people have few investment options and see Bitcoin as a coveted commodity. In Beijing's version of Silicon Valley, traders buy and sell Bitcoins at this coffee shop for startups.
This is one of the most popular places for Bitcoin traders in China to get together. They hold seminars here and swap information about the virtual currency.
Chandler Guo says he has 1,000 bitcoins. Despite recent volatility, the 30-year-old prefers the currency because it helps him transfer money worldwide fast, a luxury Chinese have never had before due to the country's currency controls. Bitcoin is actually a financial network, he says. If you're in the U.S. and I'm in China, if I ask you to send me 2 bitcoins, you can transfer them right away. The authorities are wary of anything that could disrupt China's tightly controlled financial system and are unnerving Bitcoin believers by cracking down on its trade here, most recently stopping certain exchanges from taking more yuan deposits, a key to driving prices higher. Li isn't worried. He says his firm's trading volume is the equivalent of $50 million a day. Bitcoin is more trustworthy because its credit is based in science, he says, not in an individual or a state. Perhaps not exactly what the government would like to hear.
And everyone in the Bitcoin business here in China is waiting for clarity from the government because they're wondering if all these recent moves are a way for the government to try to dampen the euphoria, or is it actually a warning that they're going to shut the currency down here?